Let's understand how triangular arbitrage works using a simple example. This is a concept that's covered in Chapter 5 of the International Financial Management textbook. And it essentially says that when implied cross rate that you calculate from direct exchange rates is not aligned with the quoted cross rate, you have a triangular arbitrage opportunity, essentially a way to make money without taking risk. So we're going to see how that works by using this simple example. Let's suppose there was an institution in London quoting a rate between dollars and pounds, and that was $1.5 per pound. And there's another bank in New York making market between euros and dollars at the rate of 1.2 euros per dollar, and a third bank in Amsterdam that was making direct market between euros and pounds at the rate of 2 euros per pound. So the question is there a triangular arbitrage opportunity? And if so, how can you make money if you were a British investor or if you were an American investor? So let's see how that works, and let's break down this problem into steps. The first thing you're going to do is you are going to compute the implied cross rate between euros and pounds. Then you are going to compare that implied cross rate you computed against the quoted cross rate. And if these two numbers are not the same, if the implied cross rate is not aligned, or if the implied cross rate is not the same as the quoted cross rate, there's a triangular arbitrage opportunity. Once you know that, you can figure out the sequence of transactions to engage in order to make money, and you can compute your dollar profit. A related question is what happens if you engage in transactions in the opposite direction, and we're going to take a look at that. And finally, what if you were not an American investor? What if you were, for example, a British investor and you wanted to take advantage of this triangular arbitrage opportunity? What should you do? And we're going to take a look at that and compute your pound profit. So let's go ahead and start with the very first step. Please note that we have the rates given to us in that small box, so we don't have to keep going back to refer to these rates. So the very first step is going to be computing the implied cross rate for euros and pounds. And it's going to be easier if we express the implied cross rate in this format of euros per pound, because the quoted cross rate is given to us as 2 euros per pound. So we're talking about how many euros per 1 pound. So let's make sure that our implied cross rate is also computed in this format, so it will be easier for us to compare the implied against the quoted. So we are going to essentially compute cross rate between euros and pounds using our $2 rates that are given to us from banks in London and New York. So let's go ahead and do that. We know that in London the exchange rate is $1.5 per pound. We also know that the exchange rate between euros and dollars in New York is 1.2 euros per dollar. So we have these $2 exchange rates. So what we're going to do is we're going to simply use them to compute the cross rate, the implied cross rate between euros and pounds. And in order to do so, we want the euros on top and pounds on the bottom. So we are going to use the rate in New York, which says 1.2 euros per dollar, and we are going to multiply that by the rate in London, which says $1.5 per 1 pound. So the dollar signs will cancel each other out, and we will get a cross rate of 1.8 euros per pound. Or you can write it as such. It doesn't really matter. It's a more matter of preference. So we have our implied cross rate. It's 1.8 euros per pound. So we have completed the first step. So the second step is going to be comparing the implied against the quoted. So we know our quoted cross rate. It is given to us, and it is 2 euros per pound. We just computed our implied cross rate, and we got 1.8 euros per pound. So please remember that implied cross rate of 1.8 euros per pound actually is not available for you to engage in a transaction directly, but you can get this rate indirectly by engaging a couple of transactions. But this rate of €2 per pound, this is your quoted cross rate by a bank in Amsterdam, so you can actually trade between euros and pounds at this quoted cross rate. So clearly these two numbers are not the same, so triangular arbitrage opportunity exists. Since these two numbers are not the same, in other words, what this means is the direct exchange rates are not aligned with the quoted cross rate. So what you need to do is you have to figure out what transaction should you actually undertake with the bank in Amsterdam. So what's going to help us is just looking at the exchange rates by paying attention to how they're quoted. So probably the easiest way to think about this is remembering that we always want to buy low and sell high. So remember, we're talking about price of pounds in terms of euros. So our implied cross rate tells us that 1 pound is equivalent to 1.8 euros. But here's a bank in Amsterdam that's willing to buy or sell pounds for 2 euros. So again, we always want to buy low and sell high. So we want to be selling pounds for euros at this higher rate of 2 euros. So this tells us that we want to sell pounds and buy euros in Amsterdam. This means we're essentially going from pound to euro. So once we know this, it's going to be easy for us to figure out the rest of the transactions. So remember that if you're going between three currencies, pound, euros, and dollars, there's really two ways to go between these three currencies and end up with the same currency that you started with. So you can go from dollar to pound, back to euro, back to dollar, or the other way around. So since we already figured out that we want to be going from pound to euros in the previous step, remember, we want to be selling pounds for euros at the higher rate of 2 euros per pound, and this is with the bank in Amsterdam. Since we already figured out this is the correct transaction to engage in Amsterdam, this sequence is the correct sequence, or this direction is the correct direction. So if you're an American investor, you're obviously starting with dollars, so you want to start from dollar and end up with a dollar. So this would be your sequence of transaction, and this is how we're going to make money. So let's take a look at how this will exactly work. So first thing you're going to do is you are going to sell your dollars. So you are going to sell your dollars and buy pounds in London. So you have $1,000 and you're going to convert them into pounds at the rate of $1.50 per pound that was quoted by the bank in London. This will generate you 666.67 pounds. So the next step is going to be taking those pounds and selling them. So selling those pounds and buying euros in Amsterdam. So remember, the bank in Amsterdam is making direct market between euros and pounds at the rate of 2 euros per pound. So you take your 666.67 pounds and convert them into euros at the rate of 2 euros per pound. And this will generate you 1,333.33 euros. Next, you take those euros and sell them and buy dollars in return in New York. So you take your 1,333.33 euros and convert them into dollars at the rate of 1.2 euros per dollar, and this will generate you $1,111.11. So let's figure out what our profit is from this sequence of transactions. So profit is difference between the money that you end up with, which is $1,111.11, minus what you started with, which is $1,000, and that gives you a profit of $111.11, which is essentially a return of 11.11%. So this would be the sequence of transactions that you would engage in if you were an American investor with $1,000 to start in order to make money, and your profit is $111. So next question is, what happens if you engage in transactions in the opposite direction? So we said we want to go from dollar to pounds, then to euros, and back to dollar. But what if you do the opposite? In other words, what if you start from dollar and go to euro? From there, exchange your euros for pounds, then exchange pounds to dollars. What will happen then? Well, you will lose money. So let's see exactly how how much money you will lose. So in this case, what you're doing is you're selling your dollars and buying euros, and that happens in New York or with the bank in New York. And so you take your $1,000 and convert them into euros at the rate of 1.2 euros per dollar, and this will generate you 1,200 euros. The next step is going to be selling those euros and buying pounds, and that's in Amsterdam or with the bank in Amsterdam. And that means taking your 1,200 euros and convert it into pounds at the rate of 2 euros per pound, which will generate you 600 pounds. So the final step is selling those 600 pounds and buying dollars in London. At the rate of $1.50 per pound. And this will give you $900. So let's see what your net profit or loss is. In this case, obviously you have a loss since you started with $1,000 and end up with $900, so you are losing $100. So if you follow transactions in the opposite direction, you will lose money, you will lose $100. So remember that in the previous calculation, or in the previous step, we showed that we will make profit of $111 if you go from dollar to pound to euro to dollar. So please remember that we're assuming that you can essentially place these orders instantaneously, so you're not holding on to any currency or any inventory, because if you do that, that means you're taking risk. So the final question is, what if you were a British investor with £500 to invest? How can you make money, and what's your profit? So remember, previously we identified that we want to go from pound to euro. So we said this is the correct direction of transactions. So that will always stay the same, regardless of whether you're an American investor, or German investor, or British investor. So for a triangular arbitrage opportunity to exist in this example, the direction of transactions always have to be this way. You go from dollar to pound to euros back to dollar. The only thing that's going to change is where you start from. So if you were an American investor, you started from dollar, but if you're a British investor, you start with pound and you come back to pound. So that's the only difference from our previous calculations. So let's see how much money you'll make if you're a British investor. So if you're a British investor, you're starting with £500. First thing you're going to do is you're going to sell your pounds and you're going to buy euros, and that is going to be in Amsterdam. And so you take your £500 and you're going to convert them into euros at the rate of 2 euros per pound, and you will get 1,000 euros. The next step is going to be selling those euros and buying dollars in New York. So you take your 1,000 euros and then you convert them into dollars at the rate of 1.2 euros per dollar. That's quoted by the bank in New York, and this will generate you $833.33. So the final step is going to be selling those dollars and buying pounds, so you end up with pounds. So you take your $833.33 and convert them into pounds at the rate of $1.5 per pound. That is quoted by the bank in London, and this will generate you $555.55. So let's calculate your profit. Profit is simply the difference between the 555.55 pounds that you end up with and the 500 pounds that you started with. So the profit is 55 pounds and 55 cents. If you were a British investor with 500 pounds to start, this is actually the same as 11.11% return that the American investor made. So percentage return is the same, but the pound amount is different, obviously, because you're starting with a different amount of pounds. So this is how you would compute the profit if you were a British investor with 500 pounds to start with.